welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany, and each week we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 6 of The Kill File. Today we are going to talk about the murder of Jesse Valencia. This is a story that I will forever hold dear to my heart, and one that I hadn't actually heard about until I had watched the episode from a show that I like called How I Caught My Killer. It's like a documentary style show, and each episode is a different case. This one is absolutely heartbreaking, but it's important for us to know and to share and to remember Jesse by. So let's just jump into it. Jesse Valencia was born on February 22nd, 1981 in Boyle County, Kentucky. He was born to his mother, Linda. They had always had a close bond. Linda was only 21 when she had Jesse, so they essentially grew up together. Linda said, quote, "From the time he was born, I took him everywhere with me. I wouldn't even go out on dates unless I took him with me, and everybody accepted it," end quote. Jesse also grew up with 2 sisters. One source said that Jesse may have went on to work as a model after high school. Jesse was absolutely gorgeous. He started at Missouri State University, which is called Mizzou, in 2002. Jesse was going into his senior year, and he had dreams of becoming a lawyer. He was also very talented as a journalist. Jesse was openly gay and was described as being out loud and proud. He was also a vocal advocate for social justice. He was said to be very passionate about gay rights. Jesse's stepfather, Lupe Valencia, said that Jesse grew up in humble beginnings with not a lot of money, and everything that he had accomplished was on his own. His family was very proud of him. Lupe went on to say that his family had given him a ton of moral support and that they loved him deeply. He also said that Jesse liked to call home and talk to his mother for hours, as well as his 2 younger sisters. In an interview that Lupe gave on the episode, it had been 18 years since Jesse's death, and Lupe still couldn't really talk about it. With tears in his eyes, he said that Jesse was raised in a barn, much like the one they were standing in, where his stepdad was training horses. Lupe also said that no one deserved what happened to Jesse, but especially not him. Jesse was the first of his family to go to college. He was a free spirit who loved life to the fullest and confided in his mother about the boys he was dating in college. A childhood friend of Jesse's named Erin Bailey, who was a friend of his in high school, which was the Boyle County High School in Kentucky, said that her and Jesse became instantly friends. She said, quote, "He was larger than life. He was driven, smart, funny, and politically savvy. He was known as a person who didn't bow down to the status quo. He was a passionate advocate for gay rights," end quote. She said that she could tell from his many articles that he wrote for various outlets that gay rights was an issue that was very dear to him. Jesse was not only wanting to become a lawyer, but he was also studying journalism, which seemed to be another passion of his. He often wrote letters to the campus newspaper at Mizzou called The Maneater. He was also published in a local alternative political magazine called Prospectus. His family was so proud of his various articles. A bartender near campus said she remembers Jesse fondly, that he was a young, fun kid. The bar had a picture of Jesse in a full handstand, and the bartender said she remembered that he was doing cartwheels and dancing his butt off. I loved her description of him. It was so genuine and sweet. She said that he was just very loved. So, what happened to Jesse, you may ask? Jesse's body was found laying in the grass not far off campus during the early morning of June 5th, 2004. He was naked except for his underwear and had been laying between 2 houses. Jesse's neck, trigger warning, was wrung. His throat was slashed by a serrated knife. He had heavy bruising across his collarbone and significant bruising between his shoulder blades in the middle of his back. They were able to take DNA from Jesse's fingernails, but this would take weeks upon weeks to get back. Jesse had a shaved chest, and yet they found some arm hair that was not Jesse's on his chest that was also sent out to be tested. A man named Randy Boehm, who was the chief of police, said they knew this killing was personal because of the throat slitting. He believed that Jesse probably knew his killer. Jeff Westbrook was the lead investigator in Columbia Police Department. He was also the first responding investigator on this case. When Jesse's body was found, they had no way to ID him because he had nothing on him. So the police started immediately canvassing, trying to figure out if someone knew who this young man was. They had taken a picture of just his face to show the neighbors and people around until finally someone recognized him. Jesse had lived only 7 houses down from where his body was found. The apartments where he lived used to be a house that was converted into apartments. The sergeant on the scene put an officer named Stephen Rios in charge of guarding Jesse's apartment. Jesse's neighbor, who was the adjoining apartment, was named Christopher Kepner. He said that he remembered something the night before, which was the night that Jesse was killed. He said he came home drunk around 3 a.m., and sometime during the night he heard next door that people were arguing. In his report, I saw that it said he heard "stop" like 3 separate times. He said he got up, banged on the wall, and said, "Shut up over there." To which he then said it went deathly quiet and he didn't hear any more noise. This is when police figured that whoever killed Jesse probably chased him down the street and no one heard any noise, which is just so sad to think that he may have been running, and all I could think was that, did he scream? Did just no one hear him because it was the middle of the night? Was he not screaming because he was just focused on running as fast as he could and he didn't have that thought? It's just so sad to me that this poor young wonderful kid full of life was taken from this earth before his time. It seems like he would have went on to do such great things in life. Back at Jesse's apartment, the police were able to find some clues, like a used condom on the floor that was sent out for testing. They had hopes that it would shed some light as to what happened to him. The medical examiner on the case was a woman named Valerie Rad. She had Jesse's body transported to the coroner's office, to which she said that it was clear from the autopsy that Jesse had put up one hell of a fight. She concluded that the knife used to slit Jesse's throat was a serrated blade. The killer was so brutal to Jesse that he had severed both of Jesse's jugular veins and nicked his vertebrae. This led the police to again conclude that this was a personal attack from someone Jesse knew. The authorities said it was unusual for someone to have been killed like that from a stranger. A man named John Warley was another one of Jesse's childhood friends, and he said that when he heard the news about Jesse, he said the immediate thought that he had was, who did he make mad? He said that if Jesse ever felt like he needed to say something, or if he ever had a certain feeling about something, he would say it. And I love this. Someone who is not afraid of feelings and just lays it all out there is my kind of person, so good for him. He seemed to be a person who was not afraid to stand up for what's right, and honestly, same. I love it. Stand up for what you believe in, stand up for what's right, stand up for people who don't have a voice. I am here for all of it. So just hours after Jesse's autopsy, investigators got a call about a party the night that Jesse was murdered. Within 24 hours of Jesse's body being found, a college friend of his named Crystal Loyland called investigators. She said that Jesse had been to a party at her house the same night that he was killed. Warley said that Jesse was always the life of the party. He absolutely loved being the center of attention, and he loved being the one that made other people have just the best time. Crystal then went on to say that Jesse had shown up to her party with 2 men that she had never met before, a man named Eric Thurston and his roommate, a man named Ed McDevitt. She said that Eric had left the party around 2:30 a.m. and that Jesse had left with Ed around 3 a.m. This helped police with the timeline in knowing that Jesse was still alive around 3 a.m. that evening or that early morning. Now the police needed to track down this man named Eric and this man named Ed. The authorities said that Ed Thurston's interview was one of the most bizarre interviews that they had ever witnessed. Apparently, when they sat Eric down to ask him questions about the night, they had told him what happened to Jesse, to which Eric replied, quote, "Well, I could kill a person, but I didn't kill him," end quote. Is somebody out there watching this, dude? Because that is so weird and creepy. Who says that? Who even knows that they're capable of killing someone? I feel like the rest of us are out here asking ourselves, like, could we be capable of killing somebody if we had to for, like, self-defense? And this dude is just like, yeah, I could kill someone. Yikes. Eric then stated that him and Ed used to date, but had recently broken up, and now Ed and Jesse were seeing each other. At that point, the police had to consider the fact that Eric could have killed Jesse in what seemed like a crime of passion. However, Eric had told the authorities that after he had left Crystal's party, he met a man named Kevin and that him and Kevin spent the night together. Now authorities were going to need to track down this Kevin person. When Ed was brought in for questioning, it was a stark contrast to Eric's interview. When police told Ed what had happened, they said that Ed was visibly distraught, which they said was the complete opposite of Eric. Ed was crying and he was upset, and his reaction seemed as it would if you found out somebody that you were dating was murdered. Ed told police he had met Jesse 2 days prior at a local nightclub, and they had hooked up that night at Jesse's apartment. Ed was able to confirm that the used condom that was found at Jesse's apartment was from that first night. Then on Friday night, Ed said that he was able to see Jesse again at the party. He said that after him and Jesse had left together, they both stood outside on the sidewalk chatting. He said that Jesse asked him to come home with him, but that Ed said he couldn't because he had to go to work at 6 a.m. Ed was a chef at a local restaurant. Jesse then walked home alone that night. Ed said that after him and Jesse parted ways, he went home and went straight to bed, which makes sense. Like, if you have to go to work in 3 hours, I can imagine that the only thing you want to do is put your face on a pillow. I don't miss those kind of nights in the least. I am just too old for that crap now. I enjoy going to bed at a reasonable time and getting up without feeling like crap, you know? When Ed told police his recount of the night of the party, the first thought for police was that Ed's alibi wasn't strong. They also had to consider the possibility that Ed had access to a lot of knives in his job as a chef. The police had already known that the knife that was used to kill Jesse had a serrated blade, which could easily be accessed at a place like a restaurant. Before the police released Eric and Ed, they took DNA samples from both of them to send it off to the lab. Warley said that Jesse was a very beautiful person. He said that women took notice of him, men took notice of him, and that everyone was always looking at Jesse. Which, when you look at his pictures, you can tell this to be absolutely true. He had beautiful eyes, and everyone around him just painted this picture of this gorgeous, fun, outspoken young man that people were drawn to. This was the point where the authorities would receive an anonymous call that would change the entire investigation. A tip was called in that Jesse was having a relationship with a married man who was a police officer in Colombia, and that this police officer was married, and that this police officer also had a young child at home. Holy crap, a police officer? Yes, a police officer. My mind was blown. I didn't know where the story was going, so it was really gripping in the most unfortunate way for me. This is when police realized that they may have to start looking at the possibility that this could be one of their own. Boehm, if you recall, who was the chief of police at this time, said at this time they didn't have any openly gay male police officers on the force, so no one came to mind for them. He also said that although they were taking this tip seriously, they couldn't dismiss the fact that this tip could have come from someone who had a personal beef with the police department and was looking to stir stuff up. However, they had to follow the lead. The anonymous tip then gained a little bit of credibility when the investigators brought in a 21-year-old man named Andy Schermerhorn. Great name. They brought him in for questioning. He was good friends with Jesse, and he was also a former boyfriend of Jesse's. During this interview, Andy stated that he had been at Jesse's apartment on May 14th, where they were in bed together, engaging in sexual activities, when at 3:30 a.m., there was a knock on the door. He then said that Jesse answered the door. There was a police officer standing in the doorway in full uniform. Andy said he was immediately frightened, and he jumped up and he stood up on the bed because he was afraid that something terrible was about to happen. To me, that was just so sad. When you see a police officer at the door and you immediately think something awful is going to happen to the point where you feel like you need to get into a defensive position, that just broke my heart. At this point, Jesse said to Andy, "No, it's okay, he's cool." Then Andy said the officer entered the apartment, took off his gun belt, laid it across the cabinet, and joined them in bed. After it was over, the police officer looked at Jesse and said, "This has got to be a secret." And then he left the apartment without ever giving his name. They asked Andy if he thought that he would be able to ID the officer if he saw the man again. Like they were going to go grab pictures or a book of pictures of the officer. And Andy said, "I saw him out in the hall. It was the guy that we just passed out there in the hall." Holy shit, can you imagine? It just gave me such goosebumps. Oh my gosh. Being the officers finding this out about one of your coworkers and the guy that you're interviewing, it's just like, hey, that guy right out there, that was the dude. That's scary. Then the police had to ask themselves, who had they just passed? They then realized that they had just passed an officer in the hall by the name of Stephen Rios. This was the same officer that was standing guard over Jesse's apartment the day that Jesse's body was found. Oh my God, right? So Stephen Rios was a young, married police officer, said to be in his 20s, and he had a brand new baby at home. Rios had only been a cop for about 2 or 3 years, and the department had thought that he was doing a good job. It was at this time that the police found out that 6 weeks earlier, Rios had arrested Jesse on April 18th, 2004. Jesse had 3 female friends who were all having a party that Jesse was there for. Apparently during this party, they were getting a little loud, and the police were called twice that evening for noise complaints. When the police arrived, it was said that Jesse had gotten in between the officers and his female friends and said, "What's your probable cause for arresting my friends?" Rios then proceeded to arrest Jesse and gave him a ticket to appear in court for the charge of obstructing a governmental operation. This is just my personal opinion, and I hope that this is no offense to anybody who may be a police officer. I've got no beef with cops, but when I read this, and I don't know the situation, it just screamed to me that he was a young officer who was one of those people maybe who was like, oh, I'm important and how dare you, like looking for something to prove, because arresting somebody who was probably intoxicated, who was going to school to be a lawyer, who was just like, hey, what's your probable cause for arresting my friends? Like trying to help his friends out. For you to arrest that kid and say that he's obstructing a governmental operation just makes it seem like Jesse was, in the middle of something way worse than just a party where people were getting too loud. I had big feelings about that. So when Rios showed up for work on the day of Jesse's murder, he did not hide the fact that he knew Jesse. He said, yeah, it was a person that I had arrested 6 weeks earlier. This is when police had to wonder if Rios had gone inside of Jesse's apartment while he was supposed to be standing guard over it. They thought if he had entered Jesse's apartment, he could have tampered with evidence that could have exposed him as Jesse's lover or maybe even as Jesse's killer. Jesse's mother, Linda, said in an interview that when Jesse found out that Rios was married and had a brand new baby at home, he told his mom that he wasn't going to see Rios anymore and that he felt the relationship was wrong and that he just wanted Rios to stay away. Despite the fact that before Jesse had learned the truth about Rios, his mom said he seemed really excited about seeing him. He had never told his mom the officer's name, but he always referred to him as, quote, Columbia's finest. He had told his mom that the officer had been coming by on duty. That seemed to excite Jesse. Beau McGinn, the chief of police at this time, said that on June 8th, which was now just 3 days after Jesse's murder, an odd thing happened. He said Rios went to the sergeant on the investigation and said that he had learned or heard about the tip that the police received. Rios told the sergeant that he may hear Rios' name come up, but that he wanted him to know that it was not him. Then apparently, the sergeant told him that Andy had told the authorities on May 14th that Rios had come by in uniform at 3:30 a.m. and joined them for sexual activity, to which Rios responded with, quote, sex? I hated this. This just struck a nerve with me, and I have a feeling that it did with a lot of people because throughout all of the articles, I was reading this part over and over and over, that the question that Rios responded with was like, sex? Like, this young man is dead, dude. Just be honest. So eventually Rios admitted that he had engaged in sexual relations with Jesse 6 different times since he had arrested him. He told police that the last time they were together was a week before Jesse was found murdered. He said he hadn't told anyone about the affair because his wife had already told him that she would leave him if she ever found out that he was having an affair with somebody. Rios then said, yes, they engaged in sexual relations, but that he did not kill him, and that he had no idea who killed him or what happened to him. Rios was then placed on leave until he could be completely cleared as a suspect, which, good, I'm glad they do this. Rios was said to fully cooperate with the investigators and gave his permission to search his car and his house. The authorities found no evidence that had linked him to Jesse's murder. The police had just thought at this point that just because Rios admitted to having a relationship with Jesse doesn't necessarily mean that he committed the homicide. The police then turned their focus to Eric and Ed because they were both with Jesse the night of his murder and they were one of the last people to have seen him alive. Both Eric and Ed cooperated with the authorities and they both gave their permission for their apartment to be searched. The police were searching for any sign of Jesse. They searched for bloody clothes, a serrated knife in the house, any kind of chef knives, but they couldn't find any evidence to tie either one of them to the crime. At this point, authorities were able to track down the man named Kevin, who Eric said he had spent the night with after the party. Kevin said Eric was with him the entire rest of the evening. Eric was then removed from the list of suspects because he had an alibi. As for Ed, however, he still didn't have a real alibi. So a man named Morley Swingle, which awesome name, who was the district attorney on this case, said that on the episode that they were getting really close and starting to narrow down the list of suspects with only Ed and Rios still suspect. Unfortunately, someone had leaked Rios' name to the media, despite the fact that police tried very hard to keep that information from getting out until they had known something more substantial. Although I don't like it, I get that because they were probably just trying to keep the media from going nuts when they were still just so unsure. The police officer in question, he's a public figure, and it can make the department look so bad if they have a criminal on their force. Again, I don't like it, but I get it. So the man we mentioned before, the childhood friend of Jesse's, Worley, said that he felt that being a part of the LGBTQIA+ community, he feels that people within the community are often looked at as bad or immoral, and he felt like the police might have been embarrassed by that. This is just my personal opinion, but for one, him saying this absolutely broke my heart. I hope that that was not the case. And for two, I would hope that the police would have been more embarrassed by the fact that they might be employing a potential murderer, and not for the fact that one of their officers may have been gay. I am doing my best to try to keep my strong feelings about this case and these things to myself as to not offend anyone, but I want you to know it is hard. Rios' affair had evidently embarrassed him in front of his family, his fellow officers, and his community. This marked the start of what would be a very messy and very public meltdown for Rios. They always say that there is nothing more scary or dangerous than a person who has nothing to lose. 4 days after Jesse's murder, Rios told his wife that he was going to visit his father in Virginia, but that was a lie. Rios went to a Walmart near Kansas City and had bought a shotgun. He had then contacted his colleagues to tell them that he was going to commit suicide. They were able to talk him out of it, and they took him to a mental health facility for some help and treatment because at this point they considered him to be a danger to himself and others. The next day, Westbrook, who was the lead investigator on this case, in case you forgot. I realize I'm throwing a lot of names at you. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to talk to you guys like you're stupid. I just wanted you guys to be able to keep the names straight since I'm going back and forth so much. But I felt like this was the best way to tell this story. So if I'm doing it too much, I apologize. I just don't want to confuse you. So Westbrook said that he got a call from the mental health facility and they told him that Rios had escaped. I was so curious how he escaped. Was this not a locked down facility? Because most of the places that help treat or deal with mental health issues, they're usually a locked down place for everyone's safety, including the patients. So I really wanted to know how this happened, but I could not find any information. So after escaping, Rios was then spotted on a parking garage ledge and was threatening to jump off. This was not far from where the mental health facility was. This ledge was attached to a 4-story parking garage, and it was also in view of TV news cameras who were reporting on him being on the ledge. So at this point, people were wondering, is this a reaction of guilt from him cheating on his wife and feeling like his life might be over if his wife leaves him or if he loses his job? Or was this a reaction of guilt from killing Jesse? Worley said it was his opinion, when these things were going on, that he had felt like Rios needed to stand up, be a man, and admit the things that he had done, and that he shouldn't cower out or jump or do anything like that. That was his opinion, not mine. I just wanted to make that clear. One of the officers that was assigned to talk to Rios while he was on the ledge and tried to talk him down told him he didn't want to do this and for him to think about his son. This went on for 2 hours. Rios kept all of the officers at bay and everyone that was watching on edge, watching in suspense of what was going to happen. Finally, a trained field officer that was also a friend to Rios was able to talk him off the ledge, where he was then taken to a more secure mental health facility, which is really, it is the best possible outcome in that scenario, so good for the officer who was able to get him down. During all of this, Rios had an alibi for the night of Jesse's murder. He said that he got off his shift at 3 a.m., went upstairs, and been having drinks with fellow officers on the rooftop, and then he drove home. This is a side note, but I was curious, is this a common thing? Like, I'm not trying to judge by any means, because to have like one beer because you had a long day or whatever as a uniformed officer in my mind is one thing, but to have more than one drink and then to get into a car and drive somewhere seems extremely irresponsible to me. And I'm not anti-cop. My grandfather was a cop. I am not on either side of any lines that people try to draw when it comes to police. I am super grateful for these people who put their lives on the line for each and every one of us every day, and nothing's going to change that for me. However, I also know that there's bad apples in every batch, and that those turds need to be weeded out. I understand that there are injustices all over the place, abuse of power, etc., and it's super unfortunate. And I don't know what the answer is to that, except hopefully we can begin to move in the right direction. But just from the standpoint of it is not all right to drink and drive, that I would hope that our officers are setting a good example for the rest of us and not getting sloshed on the station rooftop and driving home. My guess is that it's probably just a release for them to have been around people who understand how their day might have gone. So no judgment. I just wanted to throw that out there because I didn't know that was a thing, and I hope that people are being safe anywhere that they're doing that. Anyways, Rios had drinks with the officers on the rooftop that night, and then he drove home. His wife said that she had been up with their new baby and that Rios did arrive home around 5:15 or 5:30 a.m. Police followed up with Rios' alibi to make sure that it was correct, as they're supposed to. The dispatcher, Leah Wooden, tells them that she remembers that Rios had left the rooftop at 4:47 a.m. That is such a very specific time that I gotta say, I think it's awesome that she is so observant. Good for her. After finding out that he had left the rooftop at that time, police decided to check out the time frame for Rios to get home. The police drove the exact route to see how long it would take Rios to go from where he had been drinking beers after work to Jesse's apartment and then to Rios's house. They realized that entire drive only took 7 minutes, which means that Rios had between 20 and 35 minutes of unaccounted for time. It was in this moment the police wondered if that was long enough to have chased someone, kill them, dispose of the evidence, including the murder weapon. The police were unfortunately never able to recover the murder weapon. However, many of the officers that were on the force remembered that Rios had always carried a knife that was similar to the ones used in Jesse's murder. I'm guessing that it means that it had a serrated blade, because on the show, it showed one of those like switchblade knives. I'm not exactly sure of what kind of knife Rios allegedly carried though, but that was the image that they showed. So as far as suspects went, they had Rios on one side and Ed on the other side. Rios had a lot of motive, but not a lot of time that night, and Ed had no motive, but also no real alibi. 1 week after Jesse's murder, Jesse's best friend came forward with some insight that ended up being key in this case. A woman named Joan Sheridan said that when Jesse went to court on the first appearance for the ticket that he had got from Rios at that first party, which was also the first night that they had met, that the case did not get thrown out like Jesse was expecting. The first report had said that that ticket was obstruction of a government operation, but then it was said that it was obstructing a government personnel. So I'm not exactly sure which one, but I'm guessing that they're pretty similar tickets. So Jesse went to make his first appearance, and this was on May 25th, where Jesse had it in his mind that if he was sleeping with the officer that had given him the ticket, that Rios would have pulled some strings to get it dropped. Jesse told his friend that if this case didn't get thrown out, he had a little secret that the chief of police may be interested to know. He also told his friend Joan that he planned on confronting Rios the next time he saw him about the ticket and the case as well. Motive on top of motive. As compelling as all the evidence was pointing towards Rios, it was all circumstantial. Results came back almost a month from Jesse's autopsy. Police said that it's very difficult in a situation where they don't have enough evidence to arrest a suspect and when they're still waiting on the DNA. I guess that must be like a horrible limbo there. I never thought about that. I could see how that would be so frustrating for police and investigators, because what do you do? Like, especially if you're almost positive that a certain person committed a crime and you can't do a darn thing about it because you can't prove anything. Can you imagine? That would keep me up at night. And I'm not just talking about this case, but any cases where that must happened, that must be such a hard part of the job. Finally, the DNA came back. It showed that the condom that was found inside Jesse's apartment had Ed McDevitt and Jesse's DNA inside and out, which proved that Ed was telling the truth. Rios had denied that there was any kind of physical altercation between him and Jesse that night, but DNA doesn't lie, Steven. It had come back showing that it was in fact Rios's DNA underneath Jesse's fingernails, and as for the arm hairs, there was only a 1 in 57 trillion people that would match those hairs, and they matched Steven Rios. Justice is coming, bitch. The chief was so angry, he did not want to go in front of all of the press and all of these people and say that they just had to arrest a Columbia police officer for homicide. He also stated that he wanted to make it clear to everyone that they all wanted him to go down for murder if he was guilty. I liked that the police department wasn't protecting him just because he was a cop, so shout out to the Columbia Police Department for doing the right thing and not trying to cover anything up or even distance themselves from anything. They straight up said what they had to say, and even went on to do the documentary or the show so they could show their side of things and how it actually happened, so good for them. Joan Sheridan had told investigators that from the first time Rios had shown up at the apartment, Jesse was seduced by the power of the uniform, the badge, and the gun. And to that I say, Jesse, you were not alone. Many, many, many people are just like you in that. But this was apparently something that Rios had done before. After the charges were filed against Rios, 3 women came forward who said Rios made inappropriate advances to them. To which I say, fuck off, Steven. It seemed as though Rios used his badge not just for sex with Jesse, but others as well. On May 17th, 2005, which was now almost a year after Jesse's murder, the trial of Steven Rios began. Joan Sheridan testified to the fact that Jesse had told her that he was going to confront Rios about the ticket and the case the next time that he had seen him. Steven Rios took the stand in his own defense, which is ballsy, and said that he may be a liar and that he may be an adulterer, but that he was not a murderer. No one believes you, Steven. The police knew that it would only take one person on that jury to believe Rios' story for it to be a hung jury. Thankfully, it only took the jury 14 hours to deliberate and come back with a first-degree murder charge, which would result in life in prison without the possibility of parole and another 20 years for armed criminal action. Then, 2 years after Rios was sentenced, while he was in the state penitentiary in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, he appealed his case. The court ruled that the secrets that Jesse had told Joan Sheridan were inadmissible in court because it was considered hearsay. Unfortunately, they overturned his conviction, which meant that prosecutors had to retry Rios a second time without Joan's testimony on what Jesse had told her. This time, the jury came back with a second-degree murder and armed criminal action, which meant life in prison. The difference was that with the first-degree murder, there would have been no chance of parole, but now that he was convicted of second-degree murder, there was a chance for him to get out as an old man one day. Rios will be up for parole in 2049. That will be a sad day for us all. Fuck that guy. So, since the second-degree murder conviction, Rios hadn't done any interviews until 2013. He sat down with the interviewer and said that he understood why jurors jumped to the conclusion of guilty in his case. The ego on this guy, I swear. He said that the prosecutor, Morley Swingle, had painted him as being a lying, cheating husband who needed to silence Jesse in order to save his marriage and his career. Yeah, because that's exactly what happened, Steven. It's weird to me that after 5 years is when he decided to do an interview about this. Why didn't he want to do it any earlier? Why not right after, while it was still fresh? I feel like maybe he needed time to get a story together that he thought people would believe. That's just my opinion. But the fact that he tried to commit suicide twice before the DNA even came back makes him seem extremely guilty. I mean, duh, 2 separate juries have convicted this man of murder. Although I don't like it, I can understand that they decided on second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder if it was not premeditated. However, in my own opinion, there's no chance in hell that Rios didn't kill Jesse. There is motive on top of motive on top of motive. Rios was trying to tell this interviewer that justice is supposed to be blind and that all he wanted was the courts to take a look at his case, quote, without any emotion. Is that what he did when he killed poor Jesse? Did he just turn off his emotion? Rios's records showed that he had checked the police dispatch the day after the murder, which the DA said was evidence that he wanted to see whether somebody had found Jesse's body. When the interviewer had sat down with Rios in the prison in South Dakota, he said that Rios just spewed a, quote, decades worth of arguments against Swingle and the prosecution, end quote. Then Rios stated that he's just trying to get through each and every day until he gets another opportunity to appeal a third time. A judge had denied Rios's appeal for a third trial in June of 2012. Good. He says that he's still innocent, and there's a lot of information in his defense that didn't make it into public light. He states that the DNA they found under Jesse's fingernails was mixed with another person's as well. Well, this turned out to be Ed's, which we probably could have figured out on our own since they hooked up not long before Jesse was murdered. He also alluded to the fact that his now ex-wife stated that when he came home that morning, he didn't have a scratch on him. If you remember, though, from the crime scene, it was said that Jesse had been running for his life when Rios allegedly caught up to him, slit his throat, and fled the scene. There probably wouldn't have been many defense wounds on him if he was chasing Jesse down. They also had found Rios's hair on Jesse's chest. The prosecutors had argued that the hairs most likely got onto his body when Rios used a very commonly used police choke hold that probably rendered Jesse unconscious before he slit his throat, which is so freaking sad. But again, there probably wouldn't be many defensive marks on Rios if he chased him down and then choked him out and then killed him. Jesse wouldn't even have had a chance to fight back, which seriously makes me sick to think about. Rios went on to say that records show that he often checked dispatch records on his day off since he was quote-unquote an active participant in different charities. This is just my opinion, but I think this guy's full of shit. If this man was embarrassed enough by his actions to try to commit suicide twice after the news came out, can you imagine the lengths that he would have gone to protect them? Jesse held all of the power and Rios knew it. Instead of doing the right thing and coming clean to his wife and his job and just letting the chips fall where they may about sleeping with somebody that he had priorly arrested, he made the horrible, awful, sickening decision to silence Jesse instead. He did not deserve that, and Rios deserves to burn for that. Well, guys, that is the awful, sad, and horrific murder of Jesse Valencia. This story had and will have a special place in my heart. It was one of the only cases that I actually had to walk away from for a while and take a break and come back to when I was in a better headspace, and that doesn't happen to me very often. I mean, of all the stories that we will cover on here, and they will be sickening and awful, but they're real, which is why I just feel it's so important to share them. But this is one that hit home and it hit different for me. I remember Jesse's childhood friend Warley saying that he remembered coming out as gay, and then Jesse came out not long after him, and they both had support from friends and family, and he said that he thought maybe if Steve and Rios would have had support like that, maybe this wouldn't have happened. I'm not too sure about that one, though. To me, and this is just my opinion, and I could be completely wrong, but to me this felt like more than just a man realizing who he really was. This to me felt like that part definitely played a role, but also I felt like this is one that was about power and control, especially after those women came out about him being inappropriate with them. Ugh, I hate that guy. I hope he is miserably alone for the rest of his life for taking such a gem from this world too soon. However, I do feel bad for his son. I hope that kid's doing okay and doesn't feel like he has to bear that mark for the rest of his life, because that's just sad. Okay, so there's just one more thing that I wanted to touch on. Look, there is absolutely no shame in needing some help with mental health or going to a place to get mental health treatment. None at all. People sometimes have this stigma, like something's wrong with these people who need to get a little help sometimes. And to that I say that we should just be trying to support each other as humans. Instead of being judgmental, we should just help each other with whatever we might be going through. It is not okay to stigmatize people for needing or seeking help when they need it. It's actually harder to admit that you need a little help than it is to just stuff it down or pretend that you're all right, at least in my own life. In fact, maybe if some people weren't so scared to seek help when they needed it, or if they were able to reach out to those around them, maybe we wouldn't have so much crime from people who needed support and they just don't get it. This is on a personal note, but I suffer from anxiety and I suffer from it badly. People throw around anxiety like it's funny, like, oh, that, I am so anxious about this or that. But let me tell you, it's not funny. I have had it in such a crippling way that I've had panic attacks that have actually lasted for a few days, to the point where I had to go get some help. They're not like what you see on TV where someone just needs to breathe into a bag and they're all fine. Well, maybe other people's are, but definitely not most. If you know me in my personal life, you will probably know that I am a seemingly strong, brave, independent female. And while yes, I am all of those things now, I am also a person who needs some help from time to time with some serious anxiety issues. I feel like I might have had anxiety all of my life, but that there was nobody really there to help me or cared enough to get me some help when I was younger, or even knew half of the things that I was going through. But it was way worse when I got older, or as I've gotten older. Either going through an abusive, toxic relationship, or the birth of my first son, or maybe even the combination of them both happening at the same time, it brought me into a new chapter in my life where I was afraid all the time. Not of like school or challenges or anything like that, but seriously afraid of simple, everyday things that at times come normal and natural to others. Things where I felt safe in my own home once I was outside of that abusive relationship, and it was hard for me to leave sometimes. I am here to say that it is okay to not be perfect. It's okay to need support and to need someone to lean on. I have the hardest time ever admitting that I am not as strong as I want to be sometimes and that I need some help. But I am also glad that I finally got the courage to say that. I hope that if you are struggling with some issues in your own life, or you know of people who are, that you will reach out to them and ask them if they're all right, or be there for them. It's sometimes embarrassing to talk about things like that, but they happen to all of us. And if we destigmatize that conversation and start opening up to each other about how we're feeling, it won't be embarrassing. If you yourself or anyone in your life is struggling to the point where you or a loved one is thinking about ending it all, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have no one else. I got your back. I will listen and I will care. I will help you if I can. I have done that for so many people in my life and I am damn proud of it. I am also going to give you guys a number that you can call or text, because on this number, help is available 24 hours a day. You can call or text 988 to reach out to someone for some help. Try to remember that things will always get better, and whatever you're going through in your life, you are not alone in this, and that this will pass, I promise. Sometimes it has nothing to do with how strong we are or how much we can handle, but rather the chemicals in our brains aren't working as they should, and that is not your fault. All right, guys, thanks for letting me get a little deep there. I try to include some things in each episode about the subject that we're talking about, whether it be psychology or whatever. This time it was suicide, and it was brought up, so I thought this would be a perfect time to throw that in for my listeners because I care about you all. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you guys next time. Well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and listening to another episode of The Kill File. If you want to share your thoughts on what we covered today, suggest a case for me to check out, or if you're just bored and looking for something to do, you can head over to the Kill File's social medias and reach out. We're on Facebook and Instagram as The Kill File, and we're on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out our website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host, and a little bit more about how The Kill File got started. I love hearing from you guys. Come back on Mondays, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, when we will cover another case on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye!